Are
It
we
worked.
here? Oh my god.
Nice to connect up.
Yeah, and sorry about the last time. I finally
Oh, no
just over
problem.
the weekend I'm like, all right, you get on your computer, I get on mine. Just it's done.
Yeah. There we go.
Transcribing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Okay, it is now what? November 21st. We've been trying to hook up for what, 2 months now?
Yeah. Nice to
So
finally
much has
connect.
happened. So feel free to introduce yourself and how I even got into trying to contact you in the first place.
Yeah, I'm Neil Weare. I'm president and founder of Equally American, which advocates for equal rights in U.S. territories. I grew up in Guam, which is how I got interested in these issues, and our
Yeah.
nonprofit works in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands and each of the territories, trying to advance equality and civil rights in the territories through litigation and through advocating before Congress and the president.
Yeah.
And we've made a lot of progress, also had setbacks,
Yeah.
including recent setbacks. And today, actually, the Supreme Court just denied another petition
Okay.
that had asked the court to overrule the Insular Cases, at a case challenging some actions by the Federal Oversight Board in Puerto Rico.
Okay.
So that decision just came down today, and second time in as many months,
Mm-hmm.
the Supreme Court has taken a pass on reconsidering the Insular Cases after justices from both the left and right, Neil Gorsuch and Sonia Sotomayor, said, it's time to overrule the Insular Cases, just give us a case. And there's been two chances now, and the court's passed both times without having any comments or any dissents to the denial of that review.
So the first one was yours, which was Fitisemanu versus the United States. Which one was the second one? Was that the Ciudad de...
No, the second one is Federación de Maestros de Puerto Rico versus the Financial Oversight Board.
Yeah.
That hasn't gotten as much attention, but was working its way up through the First Circuit, and they filed their petition maybe a month or two ago. And
now there was one that was a newspaper, I think it was.
That's the CPI case that the court did end up taking up, maybe.
Okay.
So,
it seems limited in scope, though.
Yeah, that one's focused on questions of sovereign immunity. And it's frankly not quite clear what the court took it up to do. It's a bit of a surprise, I think, certainly to the parties involved and pretty much everybody else who was following that one. So they took up a case that no one expected them to take up, and then did not take up a case that expectations. A lot of court watchers thought that the court would take up a Fitisemanu case, asking the
that
court,
was as direct as you can get.
Yeah, you had the lower courts expanding the Insular Cases, contrary to what the Supreme Court has recently said. You had this important question of whether people born in U.S. territories even have a right to citizenship, or whether Congress can take that away unilaterally. And it's just really disappointing. We're coming on 125 years of Puerto Rico being part of the United States.
Next year,
questions as basic as citizenship remain unanswered and unresolved.
Yeah, and to detrimental effects, because at least in Puerto Rico's, they've tried twice already to become states. It's just, it goes to the House and the Senate, it gets reviewed, and then it just sits there. So it's like, okay.
Yeah, that's one of the things. I mean, when you have the Supreme Court saying it's all right for the United States to have colonies, it takes a lot of pressure from the political branches to act to resolve these issues. And just as the Supreme Court overruling Plessy versus Ferguson, the racial segregation case, and Brown v. Board created political space for things like the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Acts of the 1960s, that you couldn't have imagined happening until Plessy was overruled. Similarly, overruling the Insular Cases could have that same effect. Although Congress certainly could act now if it wanted to. Nothing stopping Congress or the president from taking action. But there's really no pressure there because the court has said this colonial status quo is okay and permissible.
It's so frustrating because in the case of Puerto Rico, obviously, I'm sure you're probably in the middle of checking all 5 because there's 5 territories. Well, I'll go into the second part. At least that have people in it, because we have way more than that. Not just places that have guano, apparently. That's a small one. There you go. But Puerto Rico is going through a second exodus. And just to give my background, I was born and raised in the United States. So I'm part of the first generation of kids that were born after everybody left the island. That would have been at the end of World War II, anywhere between 46 through 54, 1946 and 1954. And then it expanded into the 60s, but that was the main glut. When a famous little law, Operation Bootstrap, was created. It's still in effect to today, and it's crazy. And then the second exodus, that was where my mom had gone through, and then my dad came into the late 60s, and I was born in the early 70s. Yay. Here in the US. And so for the longest time, I figured it was like, okay, so my parents made the decision to leave home and then raised their family here. I mean, it was a very deliberate decision that I was going to be born here. Years later, as I visited, because I moved there when I was about 16 and spent the year there during my parents' divorce. And then, so that was his own thing. Like, I can't believe that they would have a child over there. They could have just had it born here and then raised there. But no, how could you have done this? And so for years, I was the American. And then all that pretty much changed right around Irma and Maria, the 2 hurricanes that came back to back. And that was a year after Obama and Congress decided to put promesa, which is ironically named because that's not a promise. I was just literally stripped whatever sovereignty it had, and it's now gone. So now all of the financial decisions and whatever are made by Congress and not the governor. He's a puppet. He has no foreseeable power other than trying to create laws to pay back the debt in lieu of paying for hospitals and law enforcement, schools. In fact, we've closed several hundred hospitals and several thousand schools. And so the population can't support that. And then, of course, they added 2 more laws where basically anyone from the outside that is investing in can basically get any land that they want, even if there's people in it. So they've been basically tearing down apartment buildings and stuff like that and displacing even more people. So in the last 4 years, 4 to 5 years, 1 million of our residents have moved to the United States. 500,000 in Florida alone. So I felt bad at that point. Then Governor Scott, who's now Senator Rick Scott, he had to figure out how to put 90,000 kids in Orlando schools in like a month. So God bless him for doing that. And it's still going. So this is now the second exodus, at least from our perspective. And then so when I saw the Vallejo case, which is what started this whole process of paying attention to what's going on, and that's where famously they came up with the we should get rid of the Insular Cases. And then that's how I ended up getting to you, because you've been in here for years. So
like, just kidding.
And I think my frustration, and so from my understanding of the process of how you end up getting I'll say cert, because this was certiorari.
Lots of people pronounce it different ways.
I think it's certiorari.
Certiorari is how I pronounce it.
Thank you. Well, it's as close. I mean,
people
it's a dead language.
That's why everyone says cert.
Yes, it's like, you get the idea.
You
need 4 of the 9 justices to agree to even listen to it.
Exactly.
And we got 3 on paper. but we could not get that fourth. And so that's my understanding of for Fitisemanu and the latest one from today, which I have to go read to figure out. I understand, I believe this one, definitely yours. It can be denied with no reason, no physical reason to explain.
Yeah. Typically, when the court doesn't take up a case, they don't say anything about it. I mean, they deny thousands of cases a year.
Yeah.
And they only hear 50 or 60 or 70. But it was a bit surprising in the Fitisemanu case, because you had Justice Gorsuch not only say that the Insular cases should be overruled, but actually citing the Fitisemanu case as an example of the lower courts improperly following the Supreme Court's guidance. And so in that circumstance, one would think that a justice who wrote 20 or 30 pages about something might write a page or two to say, hey, why aren't we doing this? Or Justice Sotomayor, who has been outspoken on these issues. And ultimately, it's hard to read too much into, kind of the black box of the Supreme Court. Who knows who took what position and for what reasons? All we know is that there weren't 4 votes to take the case up. And one of the things that a number of the amicus briefs raised, and that we certainly focus on ourselves too, is that it's not clear what other vehicles there could be to present the issues to the court. So the court has had a lot of excuses why they shouldn't act to overrule the Insular cases. The issue came up in the Relius case involving the board and the appointment clause.
2 years ago, 3 years ago?
2020, I believe.
Okay, so not 2 years ago.
And there, you had Jessica Mendez-Kohlberg, whose case was the one denied today. She, in front of the justices, she told them, now is the time to overrule the Insular cases. It's been, over 100 years, and they're racist. And the justices kind of looked at her as if she, was on some other planet. They're like, what do the Insular cases have to do with this case at all? After the board had relied on them in lower courts, and some of the parties continued to rely on them before the Supreme Court. And so you have the justices bending themselves and twisting themselves into knots to avoid addressing these issues. And then they're presented with a clear opportunity where the issues are squarely presented. And once again, they didn't take it up. And so that's a bit frustrating, but it really speaks to, I think, what's becoming increasingly clear, that the United States has a colonies problem and simply doesn't want to recognize it. And so, and a lot of that's because of actions and inactions that the Supreme Court has taken.
Yeah, for the past 120 odd years. I mean, it was just the thing that frustrated me with it, which is also one of the questions that I had asked you. And even though it was in written form, I can almost see the smile of you can't do that. My frustration is, why can't you sue the court directly? And the reason why I asked that is that what law is it that they're breaking? There was never a law. This was written in Dow's v. Bidwell in 1901. Like the idea of incorporated and non-incorporated, and all of that language was by the justices. And there was no, like the government, even the government in the Vallejo case turned around and said, it's an anathema, and we just don't believe it applies here. And I'm like, you wouldn't be here if it wasn't for it. Because that case was
and that's something that the court conveniently loses sight of, that inarguably Puerto Rico's status would have been resolved decades and decades ago, but for the racist Insular cases. And so the reason these issues are here at all, and I mean especially the citizenship issue, which the court had an opportunity to actually answer in 1904 in a case involving a Puerto Rican woman, Isabel Gonzalez, who asked the court, the federal government had prevented her from moving from Puerto Rico to New York City. And they had said she was an alien, not a citizen, and so she could be excluded. And her argument was, well, you can't exclude me. I'm a U.S. citizen. And the court avoided it then, and now here we are almost 120 years later, and you have the court doing the same thing. And so in some ways, not a lot has changed.
Yeah.
You have the justices and the Department of Justice saying, oh, well, there's uncomfortable language in the Insular Cases that obviously we can't support. But, the result, they landed in the right spot, at least, is kind of the message that comes across. And that's really what, as you're suggesting, it's, the result of those cases has no basis in the Constitution.
No, it doesn't.
Or, the history of the United States. And that's what Gorsuch wrote about so eloquently. But, you have to have a case in controversy for the court to decide these issues on. And even when you do present them one, they're not required to take it up. So, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of our advocacy obviously is focused on convincing judges of our legal arguments, but it's also about building a broader awareness and movement around these issues, because the Insular Cases themselves didn't just spring out of nowhere. While the court made them up, the ideas that formed the foundation of the Insular Cases came from law review articles in the Harvard Law Review, in the Yale Law Journal, came from ideas written about by the executive branch, questions that were raised by actions and of Congress. And so you really had kind of all of this pressure from all of these different sources in the early 1900s, pushing on the court to allow the United States to have colonies. And, Downs versus Bidwell, a very divided 5-4 decision, the court gave a green light to that, even as 4 justices said, this is completely contrary to who we are as a country. And so we're expecting the court to take that kind of action again today to undo the harm that the Supreme Court as an institution caused then. It's going to take some similar engagement from the president, from Congress, from academia, from civil society. And I think in having the court not take action here, it shows that those pieces haven't quite come far enough yet.
Yeah, the one that frustrated me, because one could argue because it was so close to Plessy versus Ferguson. I mean, the difference between the Plessy decision and the invasion of Puerto Rico and the Philippines, which was in 1898, was what, 2 years, 3 years?
Yeah, just
and then the difference between that and Bounds v. Builder was 5 years. So it made sense in that America, because that was when segregation was basically mandated. So that separation made sense. But the one that frustrated me was the one in 1920. Was it Balzac v. Puerto Rico, where that was what, 8-1, 9-1? That was unanimous. No, that was unanimous in 9-0. So that was the one that
with Chief Justice Taft, who was, the governor of, I believe, the Philippines at one point before becoming president of the United States, and then Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, and had himself, as president, appointed a number of justices that embraced the theory of the Insular Cases. And yeah, Balzac was the opportunity the court had to kind of correct, course correct.
Yeah, that was 20 years later.
And Justice Taft made sure that didn't happen.
That was the one that stripped us of the right to a trial by jury. I was just
that case what? Also got the facts wrong. I mean, in Puerto Rico at the time, there were trial by jury. I was just down in Puerto Rico this last week talking to people about that, and they're like, "Yeah, it's they totally ignored the facts on the ground." And that's and that's kind of par for the course. And when judges want to get to a particular result, they don't let the facts get in their way. And that's we've certainly seen that in some of our cases where certain facts or certain things are highlighted and certain things are completely ignored. The inconvenient facts are set aside, and it leads to a situation where are these judges really looking at the law and taking kind of those questions as seriously as perhaps they should?
Yeah, And I know at least recently with the midterms that just finishing, that migration issue where you have all the Puerto Ricans coming over, and I mean, we are, as a society, and I've been taught since I was a kid that the only way to change this is to change the law or vote people out. And that's how, and you can pick sides on what political party that would have been. At this point, it's been 120. Everybody's at fault.
No one's had their chance.
Is it so? But just the idea. So I've been trying to contact, senators and representatives. The Senate's the bigger one to get through because, I mean, you can't get any more anti-statehood than Schumer and McConnell. So it's just like they'll do anything except give them statehood. And it's like, who gave you the right? That's literally ignoring, we've gone through 7 plebiscites, and they're like, well, participation's not helping and all this extra stuff. I'm like, there's a mass migration going on. And I can talk for hours about what's going on with Puerto Rico. The bigger problem with me is that they're now, whatever was that, I forget which HR and which SR, which are the House bill and the Senate bill that asked for statehood to go through after the plebiscite from 2020. Everybody was paying attention to the presidential debacle. We had our own in Puerto Rico with the governor. And now 6 political parties. Yay. Anyway, just a year before that was the overthrow of the government, where the entire summer we had a third of our population out in the streets and finally got rid of the governor. That particular person is now working with Schumer to work. I'm like,
yeah, and we don't, our organization doesn't take a position on status, but we do think it's an issue that needs to be resolved and, through a process of self-determination, by Puerto Ricans.
Well, all of that is tied in because, like, for example, that's why I was so upset with the Fitisemanu case because John is his first name?
Yeah.
So here's John living, 20, 30 years here in the United States. He could never be president. He can't vote. And that is literally for the sin of actually being Samoan.
And he got the day after
Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard was born in American Samoa, but she's not Samoan, so she gets to be a citizen.
That's so John, he won at the district court. The district court said he was a citizen. The next day he registered to vote. And then the judge put the decision, what's called a stay, which holds it until the appeals are resolved. And the day after the Supreme Court denied John his appeal, he actually got his absentee vote to vote in the midterms. And so it's like a souvenir. But, he obviously can't cast that vote with the federal government continuing to say he's not a citizen. And it just was a bit of a kind of punch in the gut or like kicking someone while they're down for him to get that. Is not and there's thousands of American Samoans in that situation, and their communities their votes diluted. One of our former plaintiffs, the Samoan Federation of America in Los Angeles, their former president, would share with us. He's like, I know when I call, my city council member, my community is not being treated the same as other minority communities that have full citizenship and voting rights. And so he viewed it, through that lens as well. And ultimately, this is an issue where, and I'm glad for you, having you reaching out to me and having this conversation, because folks like yourself and Puerto Ricans in Florida do have voting power. They can call their members of Congress. They can call their U.S. senators and say, this is an important issue that needs to be addressed. And it's an issue that the United States itself created. So you kind of see Congress and the Supreme Court and the president always kind of coming up with these excuses. Say, oh, well, Puerto Rico hasn't quite done, they didn't quite do their plebiscite right, or they should have done it this other way, or this, that.
Oh, they don't want it.
But it's actually the United States' responsibility to move that issue forward, and it's on it's on their hands. That this isn't going to be something that's going to be solved without the United States involvement, even as this is a decision ultimately for the people of Puerto Rico to make on what their future is. But these kinds of constant excuses and that are really the foundation of them remains the Insular Cases needs to be something that that shifts. But until the United States and the president and Congress and the Supreme Court recognize that there's a colonies problem to begin with, it's that much easier for them to just ignore it and not do anything about it with really almost no consequences. I mean, people in Puerto Rico can't vote, so it's not like the president's losing electoral votes in Puerto Rico or Guam by not taking action on this. No representation in the Senate, and then even with voters, Puerto Rican voters in Florida or New York or other places, they've got a lot of other concerns that drive who they want to vote for. Like this isn't they're not single issue voters,
right?
And these issues are as much used to divide Puerto Ricans to kind of fight amongst themselves as opposed to finding solidarity to work together to bring about change. And that's one other area where I do see the Insular Cases as having kind of being a good tool for organizing around these issues, because I haven't met the Puerto Rican or person from Guam or the Virgin Islands who says, "Oh no, the Insular Cases are good."
Most aren't even educated on it.
We can at least agree that they're racist cases that should be gotten rid of, even if different folks have different perspectives on what the ultimate result or the ultimate destination might be. We got to find ways to get folks to work together, because this kind of dividing, strategy of division that is either explicit or implicit in the way the United States has approached these issues is one that unfortunately too many people kind of fall into that trap.
I think a lot of people also in the idea of me, I guess like doing videos and talking. I mean, my family, my husband's family, as you can tell by the last name, they're not Hispanic by any stretch of the imagination. And most of it was like, they're citizens. And I'm like, oh, we're going even further than this. Like, they literally have no idea. You say Insular Cases, and they're like, I sort of remember something that in school. I haven't been in school 30, 40 years. I'm like, oh boy, this is like literally starting from scratch.
Yeah, and we're working to try to, and this is one of the reasons why we bring our cases too, is just this education. We need to work to get this stuff in the schools, to get real conversations around these issues, so that people even know that the United States has 5 territories. And it doesn't help when with the midterm elections you had a map of the United States with all the different jurisdictions, and Puerto Rico, Guam, and the other territories were nowhere to be seen. Or when you look at the New York Times to see how COVID is raging through the country, you see this great map of the United States. And again, territories nowhere to be seen. We're about to come out with a report in the next few weeks looking at how residents of the territories are counted or not counted for purposes of the census and federal data collection efforts. And
did you see the article where the census admitted that they messed up the counting in Puerto Rico?
Yeah.
And that was by almost 300,000. And they apparently miscounted Florida of all those that were moving there too. So the number could be anywhere between 1.8 million that moved to anywhere between 1.1 to 1.8 million. They don't even know.
And and that's a kind of an important fact for policymakers in Puerto Rico and at the national level to know. And a lot of these federal programs, they don't even count or include the territories in them, and they don't count them in the population of the overall United States. So if you have the U.S. Census and you have the federal data collection efforts making these citizens invisible, it's perhaps no surprise that they remain invisible when it comes to things like SSI benefits, Medicaid, SNAP, these other programs. And so, we're kind of taking this time to take a little bit of a step back, think about our overall strategy, and really focus and shifting on, we need to lay some of this groundwork and foundation even more. Like, it's not enough to try to push Congress, try to push the courts, try to push the president. There actually needs to be some of this education, visibility, awareness, and mobilization of folks from the territories and the diaspora to really make this be an issue, because absent that, I think we're likely to see continued inaction, from all three branches of the federal government.
Yeah, I guess the last thing, basically, what now? Because I remember I'm like my long-suffering husband. I keep saying it's like, who do I sue? Do I have standing? It's just like, can I do it? Can my parents do it? It's like, both my parents live here. What started basically the snowball effect of just my anger and rage. And I'm like, this is where they came up with the savages. Where it's here she is going to go back home as one final goodbye to the rest of the family that are still alive. And both parents of mine are going to be 75 this year, and they're both in very poor health. And my dad has Parkinson's, my mom has name everything, and she probably has it. And my aunt, who's still living there, 80 plus years old, and she's like almost 90 now. God. It's like the last doctor just left. There are no doctors there. It's like what part of hundreds of hospitals have closed and thousands of schools and whatever. It's like it's bad. And then you just had a hurricane that sideswiped it, and then the whole island went down because there is no infrastructure. And so I'm like, so what do I do now? And so again, I'll still keep trying in the Senate. Because ultimately they have control. I mean, they're the worst landlords on the face of the planet. They literally own us. That's a good way to put it. So it's sort of like, so we need to let them know that, the house is leaking. A couple people already left. There's squatters there. You need to get the ball rolling. And I go between the different I guess presidentials and whatever. And again, it's every party. I mean, again, Puerto Rico has now 6. Here in the U.S. is probably 4 at this point.
I mean, if there's one bipartisan thing in Washington, it's that they don't care about addressing the situation in the territories. It definitely crosses party lines.
Yeah, until it affects them, because every single time I kept hearing the Hispanic vote during the last political cycle, I'm ripping my hair out. And it's because I'm like, immigration is its own thing, and that needs to be taken care of. But this is not about immigration. And more of us vote, and we're literally the only ones that are legal to do so. So
I mean, I would say, next steps, people should call their members of Congress. If if you live in the States and can vote, you should call your members of Congress, your senators, write the president, show people, what I always say is, the danger, what I'm most afraid of is kind of the tree falling in the forest and no one hearing it. And at least we can say, with the Supreme Court not taking our case up, a lot of folks pay attention to that. So we've at least made progress to where people are watching. We haven't got to the point where the federal government is going to do the right thing, but at least there's some visibility and awareness that something wrong is happening. And that's kind of a kernel that we can, have grow into something more, whether it's through the political branches, through the courts. And we're going to continue pushing on all fronts. Really appreciate folks like yourself that, raise awareness to this, think about this, passionate about it, because that's that's how change comes about. People getting fired up.
I try to dial it down because I can go. Last time my people went to Congress, there were still bullet holes in the building. That was 1954. We're within one room of getting rid of the president. So we need to kind of make sure that it's a dialogue and not violence, because we can do violence, unfortunately, a little too well. So I understand at least the 120 odd years ago, they're like, well, these people are nuts. I don't know. But thank you. at some point, I would love to just have a separate conversation.
Sure, yeah.
I know next to nothing about Guam, and
Yeah.
Guam is in a very precarious situation as China starts rattling over there.
Mhm.
You know, the thing that frustrates me is sort of like, you know, they have something called the Guam killer.
Yeah.
And that scares the ever living hell out of me, considering
Yeah.
that y'all were taken over by the Japanese for 3 solid years. You know, and
Yeah,
it's just
no,
like,
that's
it's a
my
very
folks still live in
dangerous
Guam, and yeah,
situation.
when that newspaper article came out about the Guam killer, it's like, well, that's uncomfortable. You know,
Yeah.
shots from North Korea, you know,
Mhm.
around the island. And then, you know, some people say it's like, oh yeah, well, the United States will defend you. And the answer is like, you mean like they did in World War II?
Yeah, they're not
It's
good.
and so you know, it's a complicated situation, but one that, you know, does provide some leverage if people on Guam, you know, choose to use it. They are a geographically very significant location that could use some of that leverage. But yeah, we'd love to talk more about that.
Yeah.
You know, another time, round 2. And yeah, thanks for making this work, and wonderful talking to you about this all. And
Same
let's
thing.
do it
Thank you
again.
for your time, because you're busy as all heck.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
Have a
thanks again.
wonderful Thanksgiving.
Yeah, thank you.